Hello again, everyone. Edwin Learnard back once again in this YouTube astrological segment. I'm going to be talking about transit Jupiter making a square opposition or inconjunct aspect to one's natal Mercury. Now, when we're talking about transits that involve Jupiter, it can be about expanding horizons, going outside the box, so to speak, enthusiasm, exuberance, optimism, jocularity, joviality, truth, and veracity. Now, when transit Jupiter basically makes an adverse aspect to one's natal Mercury. Now, well, I'm going to elaborate on what I mean when I say basically adverse aspect, because of course the squares and oppositions in astrology are adverse or negative aspects, but the inconjunct can be seen as neutral, but an inconjunct aspect can require an adjustment, a transition. Those things, I mean, that could be tension filled, it can cause some exasperation. So, collectively, I mean, basically, this is an adverse aspect. Um, and when you're talking again about transit Jupiter basically making an adverse aspect to one's natal Mercury, well, it may manifest in the expansion of horizons into going outside the box, so to speak, enthusiasm, exuberance, optimism, jocularity, joviality, truth, veracity. Those things may conflict with your communications. It might be harder, maybe it's harder to accept the truth in your mind, or maybe it's a little bit harder to tell it at this time. It could be, a little distortion, of the truth, a little modification of the truth you might be giving at this time, or maybe you're exaggerating upon things in your communications. It can also be where I mean Jupiter could be about optimism, but when you're talking about basically an adverse aspect, it can be sometimes over optimism. It might be where you're trying to assimilate too much information in a given time, and it's not conceivable or realistic to do so. If say for example, um, the natal Mercury um, say is in Virgo, it can be, trying to, assimilate a lot of information pertaining to health or statistics or learning how to project or, extrapolate data. For example, things with organization. It could be compartmentalizing a computer, having, defragging the computer. It could just be trying to assimilate too much in a given time. Now, Mercury is also connected with the rational mind. So it can be, people that are, Jupiter related, might be people that are foreigners or from another country or publishers or religious people. Maybe somehow they're having an adverse effect on your rational thinking right now, the rational mind. And it can be a time too. Mercury is also about analysis, so you might not be overly enthusiastic or exuberant regarding these things at this time. It might be where you don't really feel like doing so or trying to analyze things. You don't have really the really that feel like positive energy in order to do so at this point in time. Now, Mercury is also associated with siblings, cousins, neighbors. So there can be some issues, differences, disparity of opinion, philosophical differences with these people at this point in time. It might be where you're not really finding much enjoyment with them at this time. It might be harder, perhaps, to joke or be jocular with these people at this time. If say if Jupiter is transit Jupiter is in Taurus, maybe it's an expression of body humor that they're not really in agreement with at this time. And if transit Jupiter is in Gemini, is another example, it could be very witty humor. It might involve some harsh witticisms. Maybe they're not up for it at this point in time. Now, Mercury can also be connected with people that were prominent in one's early education. So it might be a time where you might be, trying to, relearn maybe some things, or, well, I'd say people prominent one's early education. There might be some philosophical differences or differences of opinion or beliefs with these people at this point in time as well. And you might these people might be conflicting, with you trying to expand your horizons at this time. Something might happen where, they may be, could be a sibling, a cousin, a neighbor, someone prominent in your early education, even short journeys. Maybe their issues or interests are taking precedence over you trying to go outside the box, or even travel to a foreign country. As another example, it might be where you have to maybe put that on hold. Um, as an example, if the transit Jupiter is in Pisces, it could be maybe some long distance voyage by sea, as an example. Now, also too, as far as what's anatomically connected with Mercury. Um, Mercury is associated with the hands, the arms, the nerves, breathing, lungs, and the brain as well. Um, it might be some issues that might be very extravagant that are connected with these. If you have any of the problems with what I just described anatomically, with what is connected um, with Mercury, it could be something where maybe you're exaggerating somehow those situations. If you're having any afflictions with what I described anatomically with Mercury, it can be where maybe it's putting a damper more on your enthusiasm or exuberance more so than usual. Now, Mercury can also be connected with theft, so it might be a time too where you might be you have to be careful at this time. It could be, since we're talking about basically an adverse aspect with Jupiter and Mercury being connected with theft, could be theft perhaps by a foreigner if you go to another country. Be careful what you're publishing. I would say even on the internet, especially maybe, um, that you have, personal information on there. If there's any account information, you might be more susceptible, to being hacked at this time. It can be and have, obviously you can have theft as a result if somehow somebody gets into your system, able to hack into your account information somehow. Now, another thing too is that Mercury is also associated with short journeys and local transportation. So at this time as well, this transit can manifest. There could be a conflict between long journeys, which is Jupiter, and short journeys, which of course are associated with Mercury. Now, you might not feel, very happy or jovial about matters with short journeys or local transportation. It might even be some issue with the vehicle that might be putting a damper on your exuberance, your enthusiasm at this time. So, anyway, now another way this transit may manifest, it could be where, again, I'm reiterating what I believe I said previously, that it could be difficult, more of an arduous task, to be enthusiastic regarding assimilating information. Say, for example, if the natal Mercury is in Aquarius, it could be information connected with astrology, astronomy, computers, electronics, something with the internet, innovation even. Um, Another thing, too, is that this transit could be expressed perhaps in the over-optimism in matters connected with short journeys, um, local transportation at this time. Now, say, for example, if the natal Mercury is in Sagittarius, it could be going to some kind of sports venue or something with the outdoors, or a religious congregation if you were counting on a ride to one of those places, or you thought you were going to go to a number of those places, perhaps associated with Sagittarius in that example. It might be something where maybe it doesn't pan out the way you wanted, and you were really, just being overly optimistic regarding matters and actually getting to those places. Now, another thing too is that could also, this transit may manifest in philosophical differences with siblings, cousins, neighbors, people that were prominent in your early education, people that you may know well in your short journeys. Say, for example, if transit Jupiter is in Libra, maybe it's matters with what's equitable, matters with the law of fairness, sociability at this time. It can be, hold on a moment, people. Sorry about that, I'm back. But anyway, another thing too is it might be harder to see the truth, or maybe even accept the truth in Mercury related people, whether again going back to siblings, cousins, neighbors, people prominent in early education, short journeys. Say if the natal Mercury is in Gemini, it could be, mercurial or superficial side to these people, or maybe even literally dual natured in some isolated cases. They might sometimes, in some cases, they may literally be a Gemini Sun, Moon, or Ascendant people are simply ones that embody those characteristics. Now, in some isolated cases too, if you have these issues, if there's any issues that are connected with Jupiter at this time, anatomically speaking, say the hips, the liver, sciatic nerve, the thigh, um, as some examples, the pancreas, it might be more difficult, cause more difficulty in your mobility. Matters with short journeys, could be driving, and it may also be a situation where it's harder to maybe articulate these issues or even talk about them at this time more so than usual. Anyway, people, that'll conclude this YouTube astrological segment. Until next time, people, Edwin Learnard saying stay well.